r/AskReddit. What is the worst experience you have ever had with your neighbor or neighbors? When I was around 10 years old, my neighbor would occasionally watch me open my mailbox to see if my GameStop magazine had arrived. She would threaten me each time, saying she was calling the cops and that it was illegal for me to check my parents' mail. I actually believed this until I was 15 years old. What a complete aunt that lady is. Lol, that's the exact word that came to mind. I reserve that word for a special breed of people. Her being one. Lived on the top floor of a drug house in college because it was the only place that would let 7 of us rent together. The first week we were there, the SWAT team did a raid on one of the units. There were 3 below us. They busted in the door and used flashbang grenades on them. One of the other units smelled like urine and constantly had people coming in and out buying drugs. Our keys barely fit in the lock because people had tried to pick them so much. Our cable/internet stopped working, so we called the cable company to come check it. The guy took us over to the box outside and showed us 9 different illegal lines that were ripping our internet. I could go on and on. On the plus side, we could shoot bottle rockets in our hallway because it wasn't like anyone was going to call the cops on us. That urine smell was probs meth. That's exactly what it was.
Claim your free AirPods today by clicking the first link in the description down below.
My neighbors and my family were absolutely fine for about 7 years. It's a nice old man that was recently remarried. They have a 20-year-old student that parties from time to time, which is fine. But then one day out of nowhere we find our 1-year-old cat dead in their garden. Obviously we cannot be mad. The cat probably died of a heart attack or something. So my family shrugs it off as a coincidence. Fast forward 2 months, we have a new cat. Younger. Cuter. I come home one day and my cat come crawling to me giving the loudest meow of his life. Turns out my cat was shot. Shot. With a bullet. Our gardener told us that he clearly saw the neighbor with a gun, shooting pigeons or something, minutes before my cat was shot. So yeah. As you can imagine, we haven't been close to our neighbor since that day. P.S. Our cat survived with surgery. Perfectly fine. But only has 8 lives left. Edit. Yes, I agree with everyone. We should have taken him to court. But we had no physical proof other than the word of a gardener. And it was over a year ago, when I was just 14. So yeah. I'm upset that we didn't take it to the authorities. I would have had words with the little prick. Duck words, call the law. We were trying to sell the house and the neighbor's meth head nephew was sabotaging it. When we'd leave, so people could come look at it, he would sneak around just being creepy, which turned off a lot of buyers. He even went into my house during an open house and was telling people not to buy it. These people lived like 100 yards away and we still don't know what his deal was. Once he started threatening my sister, who tried to help him after he passed out on my driveway. She's a nurse. We called the cops and he signed a paper that said if he was caught on the property again he'd be sent to jail. Luckily we were able to sell it after that. This house comes complete with a restraining order against the neighborhood creeps. Sold. What a catch. I can't wait to raise my children here. I was in the process of selling my townhome. So I abandoned my house for a while and moved to another home. Dude took down the fence separating our townhomes and cut down my lemon tree. I was livid. Did you take him to court? That's destruction of property which likely cut into your home value. No. We gave him 24 hours to put it back up. We didn't live there anymore. And we honestly didn't want any problems or worries. We were luckily able to sell the home just fine. Some 15 years ago, when my parents and I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, we ended up befriending one of the neighbors and her 2 kids. Well, one day, we're all hanging out together and I notice her son had some pretty bad bruises and a nice size knot on his head. I kinda shrugged it off and we continued playing. Well, that night the mother comes over and confesses to my mom she killed the boy. She ended up drowning him in the bathtub after beating him severely. She wasn't remorseful at all. When she left back to her house, my mom called the cops immediately and she was arrested shortly after. She vowed that when she got out she'd kill my mom. We noped the duck out to Indiana and moved to another state. Edit. Grammatical errors. Jeez. That poor kid. I know. Right? Stuck in Indiana his whole life. I once had a neighbor in college that would knock on my door and ask for money. I would just say I'm a broke student and I can't spare anything. It was weird as duck and a weekly occurrence at the least. She was in her 50s and working. One day I got fed up when she knocked on my door. I think I was stressed for exams and I said, yeah, I got some money for you. I asked her to hold out her hands and gave her maybe $2 worth of nickels that I had in a change jar. She never bothered me again. I have a neighbor who did this. I gave him 14 euros and told him that I can't borrow him any more money until he returns my 14 euros. Never heard of him again. My dad once told me if you lend someone $10 and they never return it, that is a very cheap price to pay to learn what kind of person they are. One of the few things he said that stuck with me. Probably the one I caught ducking my ex-fiancée. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of upvotes. Duck you, Jason. At least it wasn't your fiancé. Well, at the time he was. That changed pretty quick. Retired woman on my street follows the garbage truck and moves the garbage cans off the street while the rest of us are at work because they are an eyesore. This would be fine, except she would leave them in the middle of the driveway and there is no stopping on our street during rush hour bus route. So you either need to park a block away to move the garbage can, then go get the car, or risk getting a ticket while you move it. Since the houses are quite close together, we found out the first time by turning in and hitting the garbage can because it was just far enough back that you couldn't see it until you turned. Is that even legal? Duck no. Moved into a brand new house. Noticed an old toilet, garbage and a broken down hot tub in the neighbor's front yard. Okay. Made cookies for all the neighbors and went over to introduce ourselves. He laughed and slammed the door in our faces. Okay. Out landscaping our new yard with my husband and laying some bricks. Husband is on his knees making sure they are level while I stand and hand him the bricks. Neighbor walks by and yells, well, I can see who wears the pants. Husband and I look at each other perplexed. Okay. Get a puppy. Our other neighbor lets us know she witnessed the neighbor's grown son throwing lit cigarettes over the fence at our puppy when he was in the backyard. We found about 50 cigarette butts in our yard. We do not smoke. Then she also had to call the police because his other son broke the lights on her garage and defecated on her welcome mat, all captured by her home video system. About 6 months later, get a complaint for dog barking with a $500 fine. It was ridiculous. Our dog never barked unless someone walked by or came to the door. We had letters from all 16 surrounding neighbors attesting that our dog never barked. What great neighbors we were and how crazy the complainant was. The letters were not admissible since there were 2 pathological adult sons and the neighbors were against us 2 sane working adults. We lost and had to pay. We sold the house and moved shortly afterward. Why weren't the letters admissible in court? Actually curious. Not trying to be snarky or anything. Edit. My highest voted comment is about letters in court, haha. I know. Just someone who just did a trip around the child custody circuit. Letters or written statements have to be backed up by the person who wrote them by having them present. Such as a police report. The officer who wrote it has to physically be present and testify that everything is true. IDK what op did or tried to do. But unless they showed up there with the neighborhood, they can't just hand the judge a stack of papers and say this is legit. It would be objected to by whatever counsel is, in this case, prosecuting. In the middle of the night, strange noises would come from their apartment, like an owl mating with a German shepherd. In another, if I breathed too heavily, they'd come up and ask me to be quieter. I once told them that I was literally sitting on the couch reading a book and had no idea what noise they thought they were hearing. Another burned something in his oven. Rather than open his windows to get the smoke out, He opened his door to the hall and set off the whole building alarms. We had to all stand out in the cold and wait for the fire department while he watched from his apartment. The fire department opened his windows and told him he was an idiot. We still had to wait outside for them to do mandatory checks of everything to make sure it really was just him being stupid. It was January in New England during a cold snap. We had neighbors at our old complex that would do this, but cook with suapia heavy spices, then air it out to the common area. It was brutal some days. I lived in a complex with a lot of new Indian families including us. My day grew a fear of curry. Came home to a rent smoke-filled apartment. Called the fire department when we couldn't find the cause. Turns out our downstairs neighbors put a charcoal grill on their stove so they could BBQ indoors. My only relief was a friend had walked my dog earlier that day, so I know he wasn't in a smoke-filled apt all afternoon. TLDR, buy a carbon monoxide detector and get renter's insurance. Sire. I was 13 at the time. He tried to steal my dog and her puppies. He tried to enter our house, and when my mom and I stopped him, he told us he could break our necks whenever he wanted. Quite a nice guy. We obviously called the cops after that. What a psycho. Glad you guys did something about him. Well, the police did nothing but to tell his mom what he did. And yeah, he was a 40 or so, and he still lived with his mom, not judging. It just was weird for me when I was 13. The worst part was that his mother tried to blame us for what that man did. The police didn't believe them and told us not to worry about those people. They insisted that we pay to have a gate installed between our backyard fences so that they may use our above ground pool as they please. Preferably when they invite friends over. When we denied, they threw a hissy fit and found an excuse to punish us. You see, the pool was going through some expensive issues with leakage into the yard. They threatened to call the fine happy hour because the water was barely leaking into their yard they rarely used, and their dog was getting sick drinking the water. It wasn't not wanting to deal with that bullshit and also wanting to clean our own backyard of the pond that begun housing frogs. My father spent his birthday day off from work in the Texas heat digging a trench and installing a pipe so that the water could drain. The neighbors came outside and harassed dad the entire time he was digging the trench, telling him it would just been easier to install a gate. Would been easier to install a shovel into your frontal lobe. Ducking profligates. Annoyance aside, definitely the right thing to do, because if you had put the gate in, I guarantee they would have sued you for letting them use the pool, and lo and behold one of their kids/friends got hurt using your pool. That would actually happened. For the longest time, we couldn't figure out why getting in the pool made our nipples bleed and irritated our genitals. Turns out the pH balance was very ducked because we kept shocking it. Luckily, it's better now. Had this one old lady in the apartment next to me tap on her side of the wall separating us. Was freaked out for about a week, and when I finally bumped into her going into my house she said she was trying to have a convo through Morse code. WTF. It was probably the kind of thing that was cool to do when she was a kid. I would have told her that she would need to teach me Morse code first. Reading your comment made me realize that's exactly what I'd do, and now I want to have an old lady to have Morse code conversations with. My parents' neighbor hurled abuse at the paramedics who had turned up to save my dad's life after he had a heart attack in the bathroom. All because one of the tires was on his front lawn's grass. Edit, I went to bed and this blew up. My dad is fine now, this is his second heart attack. It's going to take more than that to get rid of him. Serious though, this was a year ago and they have since got some new neighbors. Was your dad okay? That sounds terrifying. The dad. What about the lawn's grass? Got. They had a terrible relationship. The girl would tell him about her infidelities and then laugh in his face. The guy would then yell about the different ways he was going to kill her. Then they would duck. Florida, not even once. Angry ex. Weird ex. One got the cops called on them because their oldest son was cracked out and got in a huge fight with the mom in the front lawn. Turns out, he was also wanted for armed robbery and aggravated assault. The cops got the wrong house and started banging on our house at 1 AM in the morning until my very irritated father pointed them to the real home. Not sure if that counts because it's indirect, but yeah, it was kinda tamer than the time the girl who lived in the other side of our duplex kicked her boyfriend out, but he was tweaking on PCP and literally threw their stove through the hitty wall that connected their kitchen to ours. Fun. Jesus. Is your neighbor the Incredible Hulk? If he was on PCP, he basically was. So let's see. She told me my dad died of an incurable brain cancer because I didn't speak the tongue of Jesus and lay hands on him and pray. Before I knew how crazy she was, we let our son go to her house to play with her daughter, and when we came to pick him up, they were gone. Turns out she had driven them to her parents' house like 40 minutes away without our permission. Gave us a bag of hand-me-downs for our daughter with a razor blade in the bottom. There's so much. Like, how much time do you all have? Edit. Okay. Here it goes. Though the worst is above. It started out that we just thought she was a free spirit, hippie-dippy Scandinavian lady with alternative parenting ideas. But we gradually learned that she was just a horrible person. The first red flag was that I picked up my 4-year-old son after a short visit playing with a younger girl, and she said they were playing beach naked most of the time. I told her he wasn't allowed to be undressed anymore, but wasn't mad because I knew things were less uptight in Norway, where she was from. Talked to my son about it. Her older daughter was always misbehaving. That would actually happened. She smeared chapstick all over an entire wall. She was like 6. Plenty old enough to know better. Another time she sneaked into our house while I was outside playing with my kids and started eating some brownies I had just made. I mean, she tore a hole right smack in the middle of the plastic wrap over the dish and scooped out handfuls of brownie. She would pole dance on the tree out front, singing Shake Your Money Maker. 6 years old. Maybe 7. She had birthday parties for her children, which we were invited to, and brought gifts to, and then we found out their real birthdays were later in the year, when we were invited again, and tried to decline. The lady tried to explain that she celebrated half birthdays. I explained to her that I didn't. After the kidnapping incident above, my children were not allowed to play at their house anymore. We still all ran into each other walking to school. She would tell me how she saw real demons walking around disguised as people. Told me that God told her that I was really close to seeing the light and becoming Christian. It was during this time that someone called CPS on her and she accused me of it. It wasn't me, but maybe it should have been. The dad was around and surprisingly a super nice, down-to-earth guy with a good sense of humor. He was actually the one who was at home when we tried to pick up my sons and told us she had taken them. He was mortified that she hadn't cleared it with us and that we didn't know anything about it. He was black and she was white. She made a few racist comments at one of the birthday parties that made me uncomfortable. Dead serious about how black people are always late. We finally moved, but she caught up with me one day to give me the bag used clothes for my daughter. Sliced my finger on the razor blade in the bag. Luckily not very badly. That was the last I saw of her. I know there was more, but I have to put my well-adjusted kids to bed now. For these stories, I've got all night and tomorrow. Please post more. My old neighbor used to walk his dog on a leash to hit in my yard. My mom had me throw it back in his yard once. He called the police and claimed he never did that. A few months later my family and I were going out of town, and after we left our house, my mom had realized she had forgotten something. We turned around, only to find our neighbor standing in the middle of our yard with his dog on a leash dropping an ice dookie in our front yard. All I remember is my mom winding down her window and yelling, "Duck you Don. Your mom's a nog." She was pissed lol.